The night she returned into my life felt like the kind of night that could break a man or save him entirely. The storm outside clawed against the windows, and every thunderclap sounded like an echo of the past I had tried so hard to bury. I wasn't expecting anyone, least of all her, the woman who had once walked out of my life without looking back, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt like gravity itself. But when I opened the door and saw her standing there drenched in rain, trembling, exhausted, and carrying a loneliness that looked far too familiar, my heart forgot the years we had spent apart. She stepped into the warm light of my apartment, her eyes scanning everything like she wasn't sure she was allowed to be here anymore, and in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked the question that cracked something open inside me, "Is there space left in your bed?" And in that moment, everything, the storm, the cold, the past, felt like it existed solely to lead us both to this doorway again. Call to action number 1, placed after the hook, as requested. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that heal even the deepest wounds, then please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the Kindness Chronicles. Your support helps stories like this reach the hearts that need them most. She hadn't come for comfort alone, I could see that in the way she tried to avoid my eyes. I had known her long enough to understand her silences as clearly as her words. She was running from something, maybe from someone, maybe from life itself, and the weight of whatever she carried made her look smaller than I remembered. I led her inside without speaking, and she walked slowly, almost cautiously, like someone stepping into a memory they weren't sure still existed. The living room looked almost exactly the way she last saw it. The same books stacked in the same careless way, the same worn-out couch, the same faint scent of cedar she used to tease me about. I watched her fingertips brush the edge of the bookshelf, pausing on a photograph face down, the one I had stopped looking at long ago because it hurt too much. In that picture, we were younger, braver, and unaware of how easy it was for life to pull people apart. She hadn't said why she came. She didn't have to. Broken people recognize each other instantly. Her presence alone carried more confession than 1,000 explanations. I made her tea, the same blend she used to love on rainy nights, and when I handed it to her, her hands trembled the way they used to when she was overwhelmed but trying hard not to show it. The silence stretched between us, thick and unreadable, but beneath it was something softer, like the faintest trace of trust still surviving under the debris of everything we had lost. She sat beside the window, staring at the city lights blurred by raindrops, and for a long moment, she looked like a person waiting for the world to give her permission to breathe again. I could feel the question she asked earlier lingering in the room, heavier than the storm. Space in my bed. It wasn't really about the bed. It was about belonging. About safety. About whether the home she once had in my heart still existed. And I found myself wondering whether I was strong enough to let her back in, or foolish enough to pretend I had ever moved on. When she finally looked at me, her eyes carried the kind of sadness that comes from holding in years of truth. She didn't apologize for the past, maybe the wounds were too old for apologies. Instead, she simply admitted she had nowhere else to go. Life had taken unexpected turns, love had betrayed her in ways she never anticipated, and every place she once felt safe had become unfamiliar. The man she left me for had become a stranger with cruelty disguised as affection. She had walked out of that life with nothing, not even a plan, except the hope that maybe, just maybe, I might still be the person who once promised she would never have to face the world alone. I listened without judgment, though a storm brewed inside me far louder than the one outside. When she asked again, softer this time, if there was space left in my bed, I felt every memory we'd ever shared rise like a tide I couldn't stop. And instead of answering her question, another one slipped out of me without warning, a truth I had buried deeper than everything else. What if you said you wanted to stay forever? Because that was the real question, the one that had lived beneath my ribs for years. I wasn't afraid of sharing my bed. I was afraid of sharing my heart again, and losing her the same way one more time. She didn't answer immediately. She set the cup down slowly, her breath shaky, her lashes damp from more than just the rain. The silence between us became a battlefield of unspoken fears and fragile hopes. She moved closer, so close I could feel the warmth returning to her body, and slowly rested her head on my shoulder. It was the kind of gesture that could shatter a man if he wasn't careful. And in that moment, all the walls I had built for years began to crumble like they were made of paper instead of pain. We lay on the bed eventually, not as lovers, not as strangers, but as two wounded souls trying to remember how to trust the world again. The storm outside softened, rain turning into a gentle rhythm that matched her breathing. She fell asleep with her hand resting lightly on my chest, as if afraid I might disappear if she held too tightly. I stayed awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, wondering whether this was temporary or the beginning of something reborn. But when she whispered my name half asleep, with a softness I hadn't heard in years, I realized something that hit me deeper than anything else. I never stopped loving her. Not for a single day. Over the following weeks, she slowly rebuilt herself piece by piece. My home became a safe space for her healing. She started smiling again, a quiet, cautious kind of smile, but it was real. She cooked sometimes, filling the kitchen with the scent of spices that reminded us of simpler times. She cleaned, rearranged furniture slightly the way she used to, unconsciously reclaiming space in my life. And with each passing day, it became harder for me to imagine this place without her. But I hid those feelings, afraid that speaking them aloud would somehow ruin everything. Still, healing isn't linear. Some nights she cried herself to sleep, believing I didn't hear. Some mornings she apologized for taking up space in my life, afraid she was a burden. And each time, I reassured her, not with words, but with presence, patience, and quiet comfort. I held her through nightmares, reminded her she didn't have to earn kindness, and gave her room to rediscover the version of herself she thought life had taken away forever. One evening, while we were sitting quietly together, she looked at me with an expression I couldn't interpret. Her eyes held gratitude, but also longing, fear, and something deeper. She didn't speak, but she didn't have to. In that moment, I realized she wasn't just healing. She was choosing. Choosing to stay. Choosing to believe in us again. Choosing to let the past become something we grew from, not something that defined us. As days turned into months, my home felt less like mine alone and more like ours. She laughed more, slept better, and began planning pieces of her future again. The storms she once carried inside her had softened into gentle rain. And somewhere along the way, I understood the truth. Letting her back into my life wasn't a risk, it was a redemption. For both of us. Call to action number 2, near the end, emotional tone. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that love can heal even the deepest scars, please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the Kindness Chronicles. Your support helps keep